And we are live with our second in a series of Climate Champion talks on hydrogen, how hydrogen can help address climate change. I'm Beth Evans, Global Director of News with S&P Global Platts, which provides insights and price assessments around hydrogen and the overall energy transition. Joining me today are Neva Espinoz, Vice President, Energy Supply and Low Carbon Resources with the Electric Power Research Institute, Val Miftakhov, founder and CEO of ZeroAvia, and Philippe Boucly, president of France Hydrogen. Neva, Val, and Philippe, let's go around the virtual room so you can tell us a bit about yourselves and the companies you represent. Neva, shall we start with you?
Great. Yeah, I'd love to start. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. Neva Espinoz coming to you live from Charlotte, North Carolina. I work at the Electric Power Research Institute. Many people know us as EPRI. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit R&D organization that looks at end-to-end power system. And a huge part of our work as we move forward is looking at the energy transformation, overall economy-wide decarbonization, and how hydrogen and other low-carbon resources fit into that picture. So really excited to be here and chat with you all over the next hour or so.
Thanks, Neva. Val, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Val Miftakhov, CEO and founder ZeroAvia. We're a very much for-profit organization, and we're working on the what do we call a first practical zero-emission aviation powertrain based on hydrogen electric, hydrogen fuel cell approach. We believe that hydrogen is the answer for the heavy-duty mobility, especially aircraft, and we already had a number of prototypes flying and getting ready to get commercial in just a few years.
Thanks, Val. And Philippe, can you tell us about yourself?
Philippe Boucly, I'm the president of France Hydrogen. It's an association which gather all the players of hydrogen in France. We have a strong dynamic presently. We are more than we have more than 330 members. And each is 3 times more than at the beginning of 2019. So 3 years ago.
Wow. So a lot of traction in the hydrogen space in a short period of time.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to delve deeper into the role hydrogen can play in addressing climate change as both a standalone solution, as well as working alongside renewable energy. As far as S&P Global Platts Analytics is concerned, a mosaic of solutions is needed to achieve net zero, including hydrogen, renewables, biofuels, electric vehicles, nuclear, and carbon capture, The Platts Hydrogen Production Asset Database continues to see a steady flow of new announcements, while new Platts Analytics modeling indicates a role for hydrogen to play in providing longer duration storage in the power sector. So before we jump into renewables, which I know we want to dive into, let's start with an understanding of green hydrogen. Who would like to give us some background on how it's produced and stored? What's an electrolyzer? I think there are several different types. And also, what is a fuel cell? Just jump right in. Philippe, I've got a feeling you have some thoughts.
Yeah. I think it's very easy to understand what is an electrolyzer. You learn it at the secondary school. You put 2 electric in water, in salted water, and you get on one side hydrogen, and on the other side oxygen. The fuel cell is the contrary. So it's, I would say, a stack of plates, polymer plates between 2 metal or carbon plates. And if you inject hydrogen on one side and oxygen on the other side, you get water and electricity. These technologies are not new. electrolyzer. The first electrolysis occurred some days or some weeks after Volta discovered the stack. And so it was in 1800, in the year 1800. And as well, fuel cell is not old, is also very old technology. It was discovered in the year 1839. So they have improved dramatically during the last decades, and now they are available for developing hydrogen.
Neva, I saw you about to jump in. You look like you were jumping out of your chair. Did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah. So when I think about hydrogen, people talk about hydrogen and you always hear that it is the most abundant element, in the world. You hear it's the lightest element in the world. And people all talk about hydrogen like it's just readily available and we can take it and use it. So when I talk about hydrogen, I like to think about, well, if it's the most abundant element in the world, how do we actually get it? And that's really the trick with hydrogen, right? Hydrogen, I like to call a social creature, meaning it's always connected to something. It likes to kind of hang out with friends. So hydrogen, as we know it, hydrogen's connected to oxygen as water, H2O, or hydrogen may be connected to carbon as like methane, like a CH4. Right. So the trick with hydrogen is it's always kind of connected to something, although there is some naturally occurring hydrogen out there. So you need to remove it from what it's connected to. And that process of removing hydrogen from what it's connected to takes a whole lot of energy. So the trick about thinking about, what this future energy system looks like and how hydrogen becomes a part of it is how can we disconnect hydrogen from whatever it's connected to, because there's different ways to get it. How can we do that most effectively, most efficiently, most cost affordably, and in a way that it does not add additional CO2 or other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So that understanding of how hydrogen kind of sits out here normally around us, I think is really important when you think about how you're going to get it or produce hydrogen.
So when you talk about producing hydrogen, just for the people listening who might not be fully versed on all of this, why don't we go through the color guide? Anyone want to take me through the different colors and what they mean of hydrogen?
Do you want us to go through the colors of the rainbow?
Go through the color wheel, Philippe.
There is a green, blue, yellow, pink, turquoise, gray, brown, black. No, more seriously, I think everybody should understand that there is no hydrogen without carbon. I mean, every process to produce, as Neva explained it, you have to produce hydrogen, and every process produce CO2. So it depends the source you use in order to produce this hydrogen. If you use hydroelectricity, you produce 6 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And in the electrolysis process, you need 55 kilowatt hour to produce 1 kilo of hydrogen. So at the end of the day, you produce 330 grams of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. It was for hydro. If you use wind energy, it's 2 up to 3 times higher. If you use solar panels, it's in the range of 4 times higher, and so on and so on. So in Europe, at the European Commission, they have defined what they call the green taxonomy. And if the production of CO2 is lower than 3 kilo of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen, the hydrogen is considered as virtuous. I will not say green or it's okay. I cannot be I cannot be more specific. Of course, if you use the electricity from the grid, it depends how you produce your electricity. In some countries like Sweden or France, where there is a lot of low carbon electricity coming from hydro or nuclear, you can produce hydrogen with very low content of CO2. In some countries like China, where the electricity is made with coal, it's more dramatic, I would say.
Yeah, I think the way we found it's interesting to explain to people around hydrogen and how it's used is think about the combination of electrolysis, hydrogen storage, and a fuel cell as a really energy-dense battery. So hydrogen as energy storage, and especially relevant when we talk about renewables, right? That require a lot of storage. It's intermittent. Need to store the peak production and release in peak demand. So you have an ability to store immense amount of energy. In fact, hydrogen is the highest amount of energy per kilogram of weight of any chemical substance that we know in the universe, really, chemically. And you are able to store all that energy in a very lightweight storage mechanism once you do it. And that's why hydrogen is so useful also in transportation and, of course, aviation.
So that brings me to the question about the drawbacks of renewable energy and how hydrogen can help unlock that potential. Is that one way, Val, that hydrogen helps unlock that potential of renewable energy?
Absolutely, and in fact, my previous company that was acquired about 4 years ago, and that's when we started ZeroAvia, was doing that renewable balancing with electric cars. So we built the largest platform for battery aggregation from electric cars, battery on wheels. We had 100,000 vehicles under control and all those things. And the concept here is the same. You have intermittent production. And in some parts of the world, like in the United States, for example, in Hawaii, and to some extent California already, we have limitation on how much solar, for example, we can put on the grid because there is overproduction at times. And even 3-4 years ago, you already would have during the springtime and during the fall in California, when you have a relatively lower air conditioning demand on the electricity grid, but a lot of sun, you would have negative prices on wholesale market of electricity because of overproduction of solar. And if you could only shift that to the peak of the what they call duck curve, which is the maximum demand on the grid, which tends to happen when people come from work and they start plugging things in, but the solar is not there anymore and the wind hasn't picked up yet. If only you could shift it, that would be great, right? So for that, you need a lot of storage. Battery storage is quite expensive, especially if you think about seasonal storage, because you also have not just intraday variations, but also summer to winter and all those things, especially in temperate climates and further north. So seasonal storage, hydrogen is exceptionally well suited, and even intraday could work.
What I would like to add is that renewables are not dispatchable energies. So as Val mentioned it, we need a lot of flexibility in means. So this means could be more network or to be able to manage the demand on the consumer, or to develop, and it will be the case later on, to develop a dispatchable means using renewable energy, I mean hydrogen, for instance. And we have also to store some energy. And what people should understand is that batteries are expensive, of course, but they have very limited capacity. So far, the biggest units which are developed in the world nowadays are in the range of 100 megawatt hour. What we have to store between seasons are terawatt hour. It means 1 million higher. So far, presently in the world, the easiest way to store hydrogen is to store water in dams. In France, for instance, the biggest dams have a capacity of 35 gigawatt hour. So you have to cycle 30 times in order to get only 1 terawatt hour. And in the future, we will be obliged to store many dozens of terawatt hour. It's a question of magnitude.
Absolutely, Philippe. I would agree. It's a question of magnitude. And I think, when you think about how hydrogen complements renewables and other parts of our energy system, I think it's really important to take an economy-wide perspective of what are we trying to achieve. So at the end of the day, in our future energy system, and let's say that's mid-century, by 2050, we'd like to see a kind of a net zero CO2, right? While maintaining an energy system that continues to be reliable, resilient, and affordable. So when you think about hydrogen, so often we can either compare it as a fuel to other fuels, whether that be natural gas or coal or other means, or we compare it as an energy storage mechanism, and we compare it to pump storage hydro or batteries. But really, at the end of the day, this energy system needs to have an abundance of technology options to enable us to truly achieve a net zero economy-wide decarbonization by mid-century that is safe, affordable, reliable. So hydrogen is not going to replace batteries. Batteries very much are going to have a significant role in our future energy system. Hydrogen is going to play a role to help connect space and time of expanding energy across the system. So if you think about just like both Val and Philippe talked about, when renewables are able to produce, right? How can you store that energy for extended periods of time, right? Certainly seasonal storage, even intraday storage, right? And then take that and move it as an energy carrier someplace across the system, similar to what we do with electricity. Hydrogen helps fill that role. So when you really look at the economy-wide perspective, hydrogen and or other derivative fuels become a very, very complementary to existing technologies that we have today.
Actually, hydrogen will have two major roles in the future. We just discussed about one of them. To store renewable energy, but of course the other role is to contribute to the decarbonization of the economy. With the development of renewable, we go towards a world where electricity will have a much higher part. All the models of the perspective which were developed tell us that we will have electricity will represent between 50 and 60% of the final consumption. So the rest, between 40 and 50%, will made of renewable gases. So and also renewable heat, and hydrogen will be part of it.
So is that, Philippe, touching on more the use of hydrogen as a standalone solution versus the storage solution?
What do you mean by standalone?
Can hydrogen be used as a straight sort of fuel or energy source in its own right?
Hydrogen is a vector, as Neva explained it. You have to produce it. Even there is a natural hydrogen, but it's made of the decomposition of the water within the ground. For all the other means, you have to disconnect this atom of hydrogen from other atoms like oxygen from water, or from carbon, like from methane. And in the future, but Val will explain it much better than me, you will have to transform this hydrogen into an appropriate means in order to use it in some vehicles. I'm not sure that for the planes, for instance, the best use is liquid hydrogen. Maybe some synthetic fuel is better. For big ships, like containers ships, probably the best fuel is ammoniac, and so on. So we have to find the best way to transform hydrogen coming from renewable into a liquid, into a means which is most appropriate for some kinds of vehicles.
Wow, well, you've taken me right into my questions for Val about aviation, because I'm fascinated by this. Val, I'm just going to jump ahead. Since we have you on the panel, maybe we can take a closer look at hydrogen and aviation. The industry has been looking at how to cut jet fuel emissions for a while now, including with biofuels, things like that. And I was just reading the Air Transport Action Group had said that the industry can have its CO2 emissions by 2050 and reach net zero emissions about a decade later. But they mentioned the need for radical aircraft designs, electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft. I'm sure that is right up your alley. So can you tell us more about what ZeroAvia is doing and how that compares to the other renewable and non-renewable methods of flight?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And at ZeroAvia, we have done a lot of first principles analysis and research before we zoomed in on what we're doing today. So at the beginning of the company, we looked at various modes of how we're going to or how aviation can be decarbonized, can be made cleaner with various technologies. And of course, there are a number of technologies that people are talking about that are theoretically possible. You start from batteries and go through biofuels and synthetic fuels and hydrogen combustion, hydrogen fuel cells. So we found about 6 major types. 3 of them are all hydrogen dependent. And in reality, any practical way to decarbonize mainstream aviation, the commercial aviation, will depend on hydrogen in one way or another. And the story basically goes like this: batteries are too heavy. Hybrid solutions only incremental improvement, so you're never going to get to net zero through those. Biofuels very hard to scale given the requirements for land and water. And then you get to the 3 that are hydrogen specific, and you have synthetic fuels, as Philippe mentioned, where you take hydrogen, green hydrogen, ideally, of course, sustainable, and then bind it to carbon again and produce liquid fuels that you can use in the aircraft. Unfortunately, the process is quite expensive, including the carbon source as well. And one thing for aviation specifically for the synthetic fuel use is that more than half, and this is an area of ongoing research, but more than half of the climate impact of aviation is actually non-CO2 based. It's based on other factors that are dependent on high altitude emissions of things like nitrogen oxides, high temperature water vapor, and particulates. Right, so those force additional climate impact, and according to some of the initial research that had been done in this, that multiple is 2 to 4x. So if you still combust, then you still have a lot of those secondary effects. Well, actually, secondary probably is the wrong word because they contribute as much as CO2. So synthetic fuels, possible solution for the net zero carbon, but not net zero climate impact. And then you have hydrogen combustion in the turbine, which is cleaner, but still high temperature. So you have nitrogen oxide at least, and you actually have a lot more water vapor released in the atmosphere because you don't have energy from carbon anymore. You have to produce all the energy from hydrogen. And then finally, you have hydrogen fuel cells, or hydrogen electric, as we call it, where you store hydrogen aboard the aircraft, produce electricity from it. And like I said, hydrogen in combination with a fuel cell is, well, nothing is perfect, but a pretty good battery, right? Electric battery that produces electricity at a very high specific energy, as they call it, amount of energy, electrical energy that can be produced per kilogram of total weight. And then you use that electricity in the electric motors that rotate your propellers or fans in the bigger aircraft. So we think with that, hydrogen can actually power or repower the entire spectrum of all sizes of aircraft over time and over all distances. Philippe mentioned cryogenic hydrogen storage for large aircraft. This can actually allow you to store more propulsive energy per unit of weight than jet fuel, right? And so that can theoretically, well, actually practically, because we don't need new science for it, right? It's an engineering challenge, it's not new science. You can practically create aircraft that will fly longer missions. I mean, subject to people wanting to be in the aircraft for 20 hours, but that's a separate question. But aircraft can fly longer missions on hydrogen than it can on jet fuel. For that, some redesign of aircraft will be needed, mostly because hydrogen takes more volume, and you need a little different approach to aircraft design. But over the 30, 40-year period that we're talking about, this is entirely possible, and that's what will happen.
Wow, I feel like the future was just shown to me in a crystal ball, Val. So people watching this are probably saying, when am I getting on a hydrogen-powered plane? When is it? Is it really near? I mean, you guys are running tests now. How does all that look?
Yeah, so in about 3 years, we'll have our first commercial products out there, which will power 10 to 20 seat aircraft. So this is obviously regional, sub-regional, commuter type aircraft. There are about 10,000 of those flying commercially today worldwide, and that's our first target. We have also just funded the next step on our roadmap, which is a more traditional 70 to 90 seat turboprop aircraft. And this is what most of the regional carriers used to fly, and now half of them fly that, and half of them fly regional jets. That will be in market in 5-6 years.
Well, thanks a lot. Neva, does EPRI have any thoughts on hydrogen and the aviation industry?
Well, we absolutely. So we, when we are looking at, this decarbonization challenge, we see kind of 4 core pathways in order to get there. The first one is energy efficiency. The second one is reducing carbon intensity of our overall electric system. The third one is what we call efficient electrification. So this is the idea of using electricity, clean, low carbon, low to no carbon electricity to power as many industrial and parts of the economy as we possibly can. But those 3 pathways alone will not be enough to achieve an economy-wide decarbonization greater than 70 to 80%. So that is really where we see the role of hydrogen and other types of fuels, what we call low carbon resources, hydrogen, ammonia, synthetic fuels, biofuels, coming into the picture. So we see those applications being pretty widespread in industrial applications. We think about things like heavy duty transportation. We would put aviation in that bucket, maritime industry certainly in that bucket. We also see things like chemical processes, any type of processes that require high temperature heating, high grade heat. Low carbon resources are probably a good application for that as well. So we see hydrogen and other resources being a critical part of achieving that overall decarbonization picture.
Well, thanks. I mean, this all obviously sounds fantastic, but the question always comes back to, why aren't I seeing hydrogen on every street corner? Why don't I have fuel cells powering things everywhere. Can I get everybody's thoughts on what's needed to spark a faster scale up in hydrogen use? Whoever wants to start, go for it.
So far, hydrogen was a chemical product. And now with this fight against climate change, hydrogen acquire the status of energetic carrier, and it will more and more become a commodity. So we have to create a market. For creating a market, we need to produce hydrogen. So we need gigafactories to produce electrolyzers, which will produce hydrogen. We need gigafactories to produce fuel cells. We need to develop new products like cars using hydrogen, bus using hydrogen, trucks using hydrogen, airplanes, trains, ships, etc., etc. So we have to, and we have also to implement the logistic for connecting the production and the usages. So we have to develop a network of pipes and in the near future, better trucks to carry hydrogen, and also to build an infrastructure of refueling stations. So everything is to be built in order to implement this new world of hydrogen.
All right, Neva, Val, your thoughts on the scale up? What does it take? What do we need?
I can take a little bit of historic perspective, and while the technology has been discovered in the 1800s, not until the last maybe 10, 20 years, maybe more like 10, that we saw some significant improvements. The first production vehicle, at least in the United States, first production vehicle, hydrogen electric consumer car, was introduced just about 5 years ago, right? Toyota Mirai. The real production. Before, there were some introductions in limited fashion, but they were more or less test vehicles for some limited field testing. So now we have the next generation of those vehicles. So Hyundai and the new Toyota Mirai is the second generation of those. So we just had one generation of vehicles on the ground mobility side, and the reason is that the technology, the fuel cell technology for mobile applications, was not good enough yet, even 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and only now it became good enough to put in a car. It's still not quite good enough to put in the aircraft, and that's what part of what we are working on at ZeroAvia. But the point is that while technology is pretty old from the discovery point, the recent improvements are quite dramatic. The second point is that the cost of energy, and that's where the renewable energy comes in, right? So now you have wind power and solar power becoming the cheapest levelized cost of electricity in a lot of parts of the world, and of course on a marginal basis pretty much zero cost from the deployed capacities, which means that the energy hungry production of hydrogen becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And as Philippe mentioned, as we bring the volume to the market for electrolysis, we're going to see the similar sort of cost curve as we saw in PV, photovoltaic panels, the solar, right? So over the last 15 years, easily, I don't remember exact numbers, but easily 10x, right? Because it's mostly process that goes into those things, and by volume, the cost goes down quite a bit. So I think volume will drive it. The focus on concentrated use cases like commercial, especially heavy duty, trucks, planes, so forth, taxis, even in small vehicles, allows us to make a much more efficient infrastructure decisions, and that will drive the adoption.
Thanks, Val. Neva, over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think all great points there from both Philippe and Val. I definitely agree. The demand will drive adoption and drive technology development of hydrogen. I think infrastructure is going to be a huge challenge as we think about that moving forward. So, we start thinking about using hydrogen in all different parts of the economy. Well, how are we going to move it around? Right. So there's a lot of new challenges with infrastructure that we really need to consider and think through. I think the supply chain, we need to really invest in and figure out the supply chain for this as we move forward. I also think global collaboration is going to be very important in this space. We have these mid-century net zero goals are hugely aggressive. It is a totally different energy system than the energy system we all live with today. So in order to accelerate that and make it happen as quickly and as affordably as possible, we really need to be working together to help solve the problem. We need to be learning from each other. We need to be sharing what we learn and really spreading that across the entire, hydrogen community as we move forward. So, I'll really put in a plug for the need for that global collaboration as part of enabling how we get to where we need to go.
And I assume that includes both private and, say, larger governments, right?
Absolutely.
New regulations.
You're going to see a ton of investment, right? And you're already seeing a ton of investment out of governments around the world. And you're going to see more and more as we move forward. I think those, private-public partnerships, where we are really understanding how we optimize the energy system will be critically important. So, EPRI has been working really hard on something we call our low carbon resources initiative, but it's kind of a 5-year R&D effort that looks at this whole thing. And part of it is economy-wide modeling, where we identify where we should be making those investments across the economy. Where does a certain energy source turn into an energy carrier, turn into an energy user? What are the best applications for those things? And where should we really be investing our R&D dollars, our capital dollars as we move forward to achieve affordable, reliable net zero by 2050? Val talked about costs coming down. Absolutely. We've seen that in renewables, right? We've seen different tax credits. We've seen the market demand really drive down the cost of renewables. But something to remember for electrolyzers, you can drive down the capital cost of these assets pretty far, similar to what we've seen happen with other technologies. However, the cost of electricity is still the major cost of an electrolyzer, right? More than 50% of the cost. And the difference between a 5-cent kilowatt hour versus 2-cent kilowatt hour versus free electricity very much changes the cost of hydrogen production. So maintaining a low cost electric supply that's reliable is going to be fundamental to green hydrogen in the future.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I fully agree with what Neva just said. And we need in the future holistic approach, so a systemic approach. I mean, to consider all the parts of the system at the production level, and also we have to consider the logistic, how to move hydrogen from the production site up to the customer, and also the best way to use hydrogen. What is the technologies are in many cases mature, but still too expensive. So in order to make it more affordable, we need to scale up. I think the key word in the future, in the near future, is scale up. Scale up means to gather all the usages in order to achieve greater installations and to benefit from the scale effect. And so it means cooperation between customers and also bigger cooperation between producer and consumers.
This is such a timely topic. right after the release of the International Energy Agency's net zero roadmap just a few days ago, which sees the need for massive levels of green spending, an unwavering policy focus, and huge leaps in energy innovation to achieve. So I was wondering if anyone would like to comment on that roadmap that the IEA put out there, and which I know has sparked some controversy.
I was a little bit surprised, I have to admit, because it is really aggressive. So far, we should remember that International Energy Agency was created after the first oil shock, so it's more. I considered it was more the voice of the oil industry, and to read that exploration of oil and gas should stop now, that no new power plant with coal should be launched, that the ICE, so internal combustion engine vehicles, should no longer be sold after 2035, was for me a shock, really a shock. But I think it's I welcome the fact that this very famous and big organization bring in front of us the need of this shock, and the need that we have to accelerate, we have to scale up, we have to change our mind, we have to change our behavior in order to achieve this net zero by 2050. It is still time to achieve this goal. It is still time to maintain the global warming below 2 degrees, hopefully below 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the time is now. If we wait too long, it will be more expensive and almost impossible.
Yeah, Philippe, I would add to what Philippe's saying here. So it's aggressive, it certainly is, which I think is exciting, because being aggressive is the only way to really challenge the economy to get where we need to go. So if you think about how there's kind of three core things that I think through when I look at this challenge. One is, it's super aggressive goals. Two is the technologies to achieve those goals not commercially available today at scale. And three is it takes a good 1 to 2 decades to truly scale up technology to where it'll need to be, right? So those three things are really a call to action. And I think as part of the IEA report, you start to see that. So in terms of context of that report, the report will tell you, and I wrote some numbers down here, in 2030, we need, I think, is 150 million metric tons of hydrogen, or in 2030, and 2050, 435. So today, the world creates about 70 metric tons of hydrogen. And that's how much the world uses. Of that hydrogen today, 70-ish percentage, 71% is created from methane, not mitigated, CO2 intensive. 27% is created from coal, not mitigated, CO2 intensive. And there's like less than 2% created from electrolysis that we're talking about. And that's not even necessarily green. That's just from the electric grid itself, right? So based on whatever that, the CO2 output of that grid is. So when we think about fast forwarding all the way to 2050, we're talking 6 times the amount of hydrogen created in some type of green way. So and I think it says, let me see, I wrote it down, 3,000 gigawatts of electrolyzers. 3,000 gigawatts of electrolyzers is about 23,000, I think it is, terawatt hours of electricity. That is equal to the amount of electricity the entire world consumes today. So we're talking in 30 years, on top of whatever we consume, and hopefully we become more efficient. But on top of that, we need to essentially double global electricity to meet the 3,000 gigawatt hours or gigawatts of electrolyzers, which is a significant challenge and feat for us as we move forward.
Wow.
We are really in front of a cliff. For instance, just an example of France, we have less than 6.5 megawatt of electrolysis for producing hydrogen right now. Our target is 6,500 megawatt by 2030. It's not 2050, it's 2030. So it's a factor 1,000. We have to multiply by 1,000 the capacity of electrolyzer we have right now in France. And the same for other countries, but I mentioned France because I know the case.
Wow,
so we are really in front of a cliff, and it was fine that Neva recall all these big figures, which I think many people have difficulties to appreciate, to understand. It's so big, and the effort is so high that we have to start now.
So thank you. And
we will get there.
I think this is a great way to end it. I know we've gone a little over. Sorry, everyone, about the earlier technical difficulties, but we are going to leave it on that cliffhanger that Philippe has set us up with for our next Climate Champion Talk on hydrogen. Thanks for joining us.